Infidelity. The moment that I climaxed inside my intern, I knew that I had made a huge mistake. Most men know the feeling of deep shame after getting their rocks off. I was no different. Not only was I married, but the woman I had just fucked was my subordinate. I owned the law firm she interned at, so I wasn't worried about losing my position. But I could eventually get sued up the ass if I failed to keep this girl happy. Maybe it was all this guilt and self-loathing, but she looked different after I'd come. She resembled myself. It's hard to describe. I could have sworn her eyes were green before, but they now matched my blue eyes. She looked older. She was 24, but now she looked 44. I recognized the wrinkles on her face as my own. Her hair looked thinner, as if she would be as bald as I, given a few years. Maybe I was just projecting my guilt onto this woman. After all, she was gorgeous before the intercourse. I got up and began to make an exit from my office, leaving my intern, Rachel, to clean herself up. It was late, and we were the only ones in my building.
Where are you going, Robbie?
I have to use the men's room.
Should I just let myself out then?
Do you want me to call you an Uber?
No, I drove to work today,
she said flatly, almost disappointed. The first thing I did when I got to the bathroom was to check for hickeys on my neck. Luckily there was only lipstick, but none on my white dress shirt. I got most of the lipstick off, but as much as I scrubbed, I couldn't get the perfectly lip-shaped stain off my neck. I soaked my neck and rubbed at it with soap until my neck was red and raw, but still no luck. I couldn't be out much longer without arousing suspicion from my wife, so I covered my mark of shame with the collar of my shirt. I can't believe I cheated on her. She was the most glorious woman I have ever met. I met my wife Renee at a market festival during a trip to Chicago. She had a booth where she performed tarot card readings. I was immediately stricken by her mahogany eyes and her dark complexion. She had long black hair that was meticulously braided in intricate patterns. I had the feeling that most of her clients weren't actually interested in tarot cards. I'm not ashamed to admit that I was one of those. Before I even got home, I knew that I was busted. Renee always had a way of knowing things. She won every argument and managed to get her way in any dispute. It was charming when it wasn't aimed at me. After marrying Renee, I noticed a series of strange coincidences. They were mostly little things. Whenever we had an argument, some outside source would make her win. For example, I wanted to watch Law & Order. She wanted to watch reruns of The Golden Girls. Coincidentally, the channel that aired Law & Order quit working for the exact allotted time that her show was on. I recall another time when I wanted to go to Hawaii and Renee wanted to go to the Bahamas. Coincidentally, a hurricane hit Hawaii, cutting off all flights for the exact duration of our allotted vacation time. One time, I bought a German Shepherd when Renee wanted a poodle. Coincidentally, our German Shepherd got hit by a car. Sure enough, when I finally got home, Renee sat waiting for me in the shadows on a love seat.
Was it worth it?
How had she known? Was she tracking my phone records? All these thoughts went racing through my head as I stumbled over my words. As much as I tried to think quick on my feet, I had nothing. So I did the only thing I could. After mumbling some gibberish, I bowed my head in shame and replied, no. The following weeks were the most quiet of our entire marriage. We did not speak of my infidelity. I slept in the spare bedroom, contemplating the ramifications of my actions. Renee spent all her spare time in her study at work on God knows what. The thought occurred to me that she might also have a lover on the side, as Hypocritical as this sounds, it filled me with jealous rage. If I was correct, I would be vindicated in my indiscretion. This vivisected my emotions. Part of me wanted her to be guilty of my same crime. The other part of me would have been devastated if she had done unto me that which I had done to her. I decided to wait for her to leave the house before snooping around in her office. Maybe I could search through her emails and find evidence of infidelity. She must have dug through my emails and texts, otherwise how else would she have known of my affair? I kept the residual lipstick mark on my neck covered with high-collared shirts at all times, so there was no way that she saw that. I was completely baffled. Upon entering her study, I found a room that was a mess with books and papers. All these bore strange symbols, and some were written in languages that I could not even place, let alone understand. These ancient and foreboding volumes were splayed out deliberately, so I tried my best not to disturb them. The most recently read of these tomes sat open on her desk with her keyboard cast aside. A highlighted passage spoke of immortality and rejuvenation. I could barely comprehend most of the material, but it entailed human sacrifice in order to achieve immortality. The books may have been convoluted, but I knew that my life was in danger. I knew it sounded crazy and paranoid, but the thoughts persisted. Now, this might be a far-fetched conclusion to reach, but what else was I supposed to think? Considering all the strange coincidences that had always let Renee get her way, was witchcraft or sorcery so unbelievable? I saw my side piece wither into a hag before my eyes, and the lipstick that still stained my neck had no other explanation. Witchcraft would explain how she automatically knew that I had cheated on her. Either I was completely insane, or Renee was manipulating my life in ways that I could not understand. This was worse than cheating. Meddling with the laws of nature and reality was cheating God. At least that's what I told myself. I left Renee's study with a lot to ponder. I didn't want to jump to conclusions, but I was seriously freaked out. When Renee got home, the first thing she asked was,
"Have you been in my office?"
Renee hadn't even entered her office before asking me the question. So, I lied. I knew full well that she knew I was lying. Later that evening, I heard a crash, only to find Renee standing over what had once been a statue. It wasn't just any statue, it was a one-of-a-kind work of art that had been in my family's possession for generations.
"It was an accident."
She said this, but I knew she was lying. Not wanting to cause a fight, I began to clean it up, but she insisted on taking care of it. The next morning, the statue was as good as new and back where it belonged. Now, I was starting to get terrified. There were no signs that it had been broken to begin with. Even worse was the implication that this could have been part of some spell. Don't witches need a prized possession or a lock of hair to cast hexes on people? Seeing as I had gone bald ages ago, this sacrifice and rejuvenation of one of my prized possessions did not bode well. I felt like I was losing my mind. Upon asking her about it, all she said was,
"I took care of it."
I tried prying further, but her only response was,
"I told you I would take care of it, and I did."
The more I thought about this, the more I became suspicious of all the odd things that have happened over the years. All these coincidences didn't add up. The lipstick mark on my neck, the shattered yet renewed statue, and the marked pages concerning human sacrifice. I felt like my life was in danger. What was I supposed to do? I couldn't go to the cops, they wouldn't believe me. And would my wife admit to contemplating human sacrifice? I doubt it. What I did with the best intentions. I concluded that if she wasn't going to sacrifice me, she would have sacrificed somebody else. She was plotting murder, and I knew it. So after a considerable amount of booze, I smothered Renee in her sleep before she could harm anyone or anything else. I buried her and her vile books in my vast estate. She had no job, no other friends, and no relatives. No one would go looking for her. I had to drink myself to sleep that night. I'm not a monster. Killing my wife was the hardest thing that I had ever done. It would be a burden that I would have to carry for the rest of my life. As I drank, I remembered all the good times we had. I tried pushing the thoughts out of my mind, but the attempts proved futile. My only option was to drink until my brain was too inebriated to process my depression and feelings of iniquity. The following morning I awoke to a searing headache, and then there was the realization of what I had done the night before. Oh God, I killed my wife. I didn't know for a fact that she was a witch. Sure, she had some strange books and behaved oddly, but that didn't make her a witch. Even if she was a witch, was it my place to kill her? At first I blamed the alcohol for my actions and my headache, but strangely I was starving. Usually hangovers left me nauseated, and guilt had never left me with a healthy appetite. I noticed that my headache seemed to get better as I approached food. It was like an odd game of hot and cold. If I stepped away from the food, my headache would come right back to me. So I found that eating was the only way to fend off that awful migraine. I tried leaving my house, but the headache became unbearable. I couldn't even make it to my car. When I got back inside, I heard Renee's voice, clear as day, saying,
"Stay."
The voice seemed to resonate within my massive home. Holy shit! Fear made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Son of a bitch, she must have hexed me or something. Or was I just paranoid? Maybe it was fear of upsetting the ghoulish voice, or maybe it was my ravenous hunger, but I spent the rest of the day inside, eating. The next morning I woke to blindness in my left eye. Of course, this understandably scared the living shit out of me. I could feel my eye moving around, looking in all directions except for the direction that I willed it. After waving my hand in front of my face like it was a cure for blindness, I went to the bathroom to check it out in the mirror. My eye was darting back and forth, looking at everything. Even worse, my eye wasn't blue like it normally was. Instead, my eye was a dark shade of mahogany. I could have recognized that eye anywhere. It was Renee's eye. Concerned, I immediately picked up the phone to call for an ambulance, but was met with yet another incapacitating headache. It was so bad that I couldn't even dial the 3 numbers that I needed for 911. Again, I heard the voice in my head.
Eat.
The headache and hunger outweighed my horror, but I tried fighting the urge to eat nonetheless. I fought the headache until I lost consciousness. When I came to, I was on my bed, surrounded by snacks. There was an assortment of opened food packages that looked as if they were half devoured by an animal. My face and hands were sticky with whatever I had been eating while I was out cold. I was horrified. Even worse, I was losing hope. There was no fighting what was happening to me. My heart was racing, but whatever this ailment was, it gave me no other choice but to sit back and take the passenger seat to my own demise. I gave in to the instructions of the only woman I had ever loved. I consumed mass quantities of calories until I passed out again. The following day, I woke with a massive pimple on the far side of my left temple near my ear. It was the size of a quarter. It bulged out in a bright yellow, surrounded by red, irritated flesh. I was met with pure anguish upon touching the thing. There was no way that I would be able to pop it. Something under the pimple moved around like there was a creature living within. I could see 2 holes forming on my left cheek. Like the rest of my abnormalities, they were painful to touch, but I could feel air on my wrist, breathing out as I exhaled. The flesh surrounding these holes was malformed and pinkish-white in colour, like a scar. The deformed skin stretched from my lower cheek to my temple. The holes would dilate and contract every once in a while, and mucus dripped continuously from them. I had to perpetually wipe them clean whenever I could withstand the pain. I felt 2 tender bulges forming on my chest and back. I could see the lump on my chest clearly. It was at shoulder height and had 5 wart-like protrusions. While these lumps hurt, they didn't compare to the pain that my head caused me. The things were wet, staining my shirts with a yellow fluid that crusted up as it dried. I was terrified. What kind of curse did this bitch put on me? What I did was in self-defense. I didn't deserve this. I noticed longer periods of those blackouts. I would be out cold for longer stretches of time. Days seemed to flash by in spurts of anguished consciousness. Each time I awoke, I noticed more disturbing changes to my body. I woke one morning, pus dripping down my face. Upon inspection, I found a scab running across the pimple near my temple. It began to split and tear until it opened up completely. What I thought was a pimple split to reveal another mahogany eyeball. It rotated sickeningly, the pus pooling at the base of my new eyelid. I now had 3 eyes, and only one was my own. The newly formed third eye itched like crazy, but every time I touched it, pure agony engulfed my entire head. The 2 holes on my left cheek grew in size along with the irritated flesh surrounding it. This continued until the meat of my cheek formed into a nose. It looked malformed, but soon grew into the perfectly cute button nose that Renee once had. The left side of my mouth began to sag and stretch towards my left ear. A second pair of lips swelled on the edges of my skewed mouth. Spare teeth penetrated my gums at odd angles, forcing my own teeth to fall out. A lump the size of a golf ball ballooned at the left of my chin. This made room for more teeth to form from within my mouth. The 2 lumps on my back and chest sprouted into tiny arms that increased in size with every passing day. These parasitic limbs moved and twitched of their own accord. This made wearing a shirt impossible, but that was the least of my worries. I couldn't trim the nails on the hands without pain, so as these limbs writhed around, they scratched, pinched, and swatted at me every few minutes. I couldn't lie down on my stomach or back without crushing the frail-looking abnormalities. My legs, once plump with fat, withered into a slender feminine form. They struggled to carry my plump upper body. Again, this was the least of my concern, as I had lost all control over them. They would carry me to the kitchen from time to time if I made the effort to push myself up. Otherwise, they kicked, spasmed, and acted as a nuisance whenever possible. My genitals, something I once took great pride in, turned a sickly shade of grey. They shriveled up like a frightened turtle. I noticed scabs forming around the base of my cock and ball sack. These wounds, like the rest of my body, looked infected and dripped the same yellow fluid as the rest of my lacerations. The scabs began to peel before my junk fell off completely. This was just the first part of my body to rot and fall off. I felt my arms get weaker as they shriveled in a similar fashion as my genitals. My left arm was the first to go. I lost mobility in it some time before it happened. It sagged vestigially for a few days. The flesh on my arm decayed and flaked off until I saw bone. I accidentally shoulder-checked a doorway and then heard a wet thump on the floor behind me. I didn't even notice my arm was gone except for the sudden feeling of weightlessness in my shoulder. Every day I was horrified to look in the mirror. I didn't want to see how monstrous I had become. I knew that I was losing more of my mind as time passed. I don't know how much longer I will be able to keep this up. I am dying.
The moment that I hexed my husband, I knew that I had made a huge mistake. I just never thought he would throw everything we had away for some whore. Robert was my world. A lot of people assumed I married him for his wealth, and I'm not going to lie, it did add to his charm. Our problems only started when he began to drift away from me as I grew older. It's like he lost interest in me as soon as my body began to show signs of age. I knew that he was falling for his intern, so I cursed him. I only made his guilt visible to himself. No one else saw these manifestations. No matter how insignificant the spell was, he was terrified of me after that. He wouldn't even sleep in the same bed as me. I forgave him for his moment of weakness, but he still wouldn't trust me. The irony was painful. I decided to try to make myself young again for him. Maybe then he would love me as he used to. Unfortunately, the only suitable spells that I could find required a price that I was not willing to pay. A human life. I was foolish. I tried tweaking the magic in every way imaginable to make it work without spilling blood. I did every other step that the spell required, only attempting to sacrifice things of great value, instead of a human life. Like Robert's precious little statue, for example. I was hoping that destroying something of great significance would at least remove some wrinkles. But sorcery isn't like baking. You can't just mix and substitute ingredients. My death must have completed the spell and in turn started a chain reaction. As I slowly took over Robert's body and mind, I finally realized the ramifications of my actions. This wasn't an enchantment to bless yourself with immortality. The spell granted eternal youth to whomever was initially sacrificed. To this day, I don't completely understand it. Maybe it was because I meddled with the spell, or maybe I just didn't comprehend the text correctly. I honestly am not surprised by the outcome, though, as most dark magic has some sort of monkey's paw ironic twist. I was almost fully restored to my younger self, but it was torture seeing Robert like this. I had to accept that he murdered me. How could I still have feelings for a man who murdered me? What the fuck was wrong with me? If we could have had better communication, then this whole mess wouldn't have happened. It pains me to see him go, but at the same time, a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. Robert was an adulterous murderer. Does such a man deserve compassion? I will leave that for God to decide. I had tried my best to keep him unconscious as often as I could. I tried making him eat as much as possible to quicken my growth. I had little control over my growing parts. Once my legs were formed, I was able to maneuver them on my own accord, but even that was difficult. Do I wish things had ended differently? Of course I do, but he made his choices. Even so, I wanted to end his suffering as soon as possible. I'm not some merciless monster after all. So I took a knife and shucked the remaining bits of him off my beautifully rejuvenated body. Now he can lay in the grave that he dug for me.
Congratulations, you have just made it to the end of my story. Once again, this is Mediogre, and you have been listening to my story, Infidelity. Infidelity's cast in order of appearance are David Ault, Forenza Audio, and Nikolle Doolin, with music by Kevin MacLeod. Thank you for listening.